Well, we're back again. This is with Joe from Red Judaism. He's right over here. You can't see him. He keeps himself closed behind that red mask of his for a reason, because of the kind of security that he has to be careful of. But what Joe is doing, he's asking, I've asked him to come on board to show us how you can look at the Quran, how you can look at the verses, and how you can go back and see what the original text really said. Because so much of the Quran that we have today, this book here, is an Abbasid invention. This is an Abbasid Quran, what means that it really came into being after 749, 750, the mid-8th century. The Quran that I have in my hand here even is the Hafs Qur'an. And the Hafs Qur'an, as you know, is a rendition that was created by a man named Hafs in 796, late 8th century, was not really chosen until 1924 out of 30 different Qur'ans. His was chosen from the late 8th century as the canonical text, and that's why we use it today. That's why everywhere around the world, except for certain parts, this is the standard text by 95% of all Muslims. Well, what Joe wants to do is he wants to go and look at this text, assuming that this is the earliest text. That's the Arabic, the Razm. Assuming it's the earliest text that we can look at, it's the one that is, because it's the one that everybody uses today. He's going to show you a key that you can use, all of you can use, to unpack each one of these verse by verse by verse. He's going to show you a series of different steps you can take. I think there are 11 steps with the 12th one, which has to do with, he's going to put it out there. If you cannot do it, then you can actually get money from him. He's going to put that out. Joe, you're over there. Is that true? You're actually putting money on the line for this?
Yes. Well, there would be a reward if I find that somebody has gone through the steps, and they genuinely have gone through the steps, and they haven't been able to solve it. Then they can contact me, and if I can't solve it with them, then there will be a reward, because I've been looking for something which will break the code. You know, it's like I'm testing the hypothesis. So if you can find something which will break this code and doesn't work according to this code, then yeah, there'll be a reward. When people want to interpret a verse, they can take any verse out of any scripture, take it out of context, and give it an interpretation based on their own feeling, how they feel. But what they can't do is find a consistent code which works on every single verse and produces the same, and it fits in the same sort of same paradigm. They have to. So what we've got here is not taking a verse by verse and saying, let's interpret it according to our feeling. It's saying we have a code here. We have a system, a troubleshooting key. And if we apply this key to any verse which is thrown at us and said, this is the last final message to all of mankind, and we use this consistent steps, then we can find that we have a very different message coming from those passages. All right.
You've all heard it out there. There are 11 steps that he's now going to walk you through. Let's go and share it with us, and let's see what these 11 steps are.
So in the last episodes, we looked at the meaning of the word Quran itself as meaning the lectionary, and how it refers actually to Old Testament readings and not to what we call the Abbasid Quran. We also looked at the word Ahsana al-Hadith, hadith, and we saw that the word hadith appears many times in the Quran. I didn't go through each passage, left that for you to check yourself. And you'll have to have checked the Arabic, but you'll see that this word hadith comes again and again. And this text, which we're calling the Abbasid Quran, has got this remnant of information, remnants of text in it, where it actually refers to itself as a hadith, not as a Quran.
So you're going to show us what the pre-Abbasid Quran is. This is prior than the 9th and 10th century Quran.
That's right. So we've seen that basically claim that there's the Hafs, it's based on this Hafs version. We've looked at some of this in the previous episode. We looked at a list of verses on the word hadith in it. And are there any more 7th century hadiths in the Abbasid Quran? Well, since the Abbasid Quran is based on 7th century hadiths, and despite redaction still refers to itself as a hadith, can we find any more remains of this 7th century hadith, these 7th century hadiths contradicting the Abbasid religion buried in the Abbasid Quran? Well, first of all, we have to know what to look for. And so this is the key. This is how you can find different meanings from these 7th century hadiths which contradict and are in conflict with the standard Abbasid narrative. So the first thing that you should do when somebody has come to you and presented you with a verse and says, this is the final revelation for all mankind, it's clear message, and this is the interpretation, listen to the allegation, but don't accept the translation. As we've seen, it's still even evolving today. I'm pretty sure that even after this video, somebody out there is going to be editing and adjusting meanings in different places. But listen to the allegation first. Don't accept the translation. Step 2, this is like a troubleshooting thing. Open something like corpus.quran.com or another word-for-word source. You've got to go to these word-for-word sources to be able to get to the bottom. Now, it might be as soon as you see the verse in the word-for-word source that the problem has been solved, that you've already instantly dismissed the claim that this is one meaning for all of mankind and perfectly clear. Because when you go to the word for word, you're probably going to find that it didn't agree with the translation that you were given. For example, we saw in the last episode when Jay was looking for the word hadith in his Quran, and it wasn't there. When you go to a word-for-word source, and there are plenty of different ones, but I recommend if you're using the internet, you have access to the internet, corpus.quran.com is a good one. When you go to the word-for-word source, suddenly a lot of that is going to be immediately thrown out of the window. The allegation will fail immediately. Okay, so that's corpus.quran.com, or another word-for-word source online is Qur'an Gateway, which has all of Dan Brubaker's works on it too. And that's also got a word-for-word search function on it too. So that's another good one. You might find still in some Islamic bookshops, they might have some published word-for-word books, which are a little bit more difficult to use, not so easy. But they have been disappearing out of the Islamic bookshops more recently, in more recent decades, but they might still have some word-for-word sources there. But that's the first thing you've got to do. Listen to the allegation, then go to the word-for-word. Probably it's going to fail at that point. If it doesn't, go on to step 3. Now, step 3 is that you're going to have to revert the words Allah, Alrahman, and Alrahim to Father, Son, and Spirit. This is probably going to be a bit of a shock to you because you've probably thought to yourself that there is no Trinity in the Quran. In fact, the Trinity does exist in the Quran, but it's just got a slightly different way of being presented than standard classical sort of modern Roman Christian view on the Trinity. I've got a little diagram to explain it, so we'll open it up and have a look. So this is the standard Roman Christian Trinity as we understand it. That's basically probably well known to most of you out there. I just took this image off the internet when I looked for Roman Christian Trinity. So it's not me that's saying this. I'm assuming that that's the case. You know, I come from a Judaic background, so it's not my fault if this is not correct. But I'm assuming that that's a pretty classical interpretation of the Trinity from the Roman Christian point of view. That's not what you're going to find in the Quran, obviously, even when you redact it back to the Umayyad texts. But there is a Trinity in the Quran. It looks like this. So this is the Trinity as described in the Quran. It's a bit unusual, but we have one God, the Father, as in the Creed. This is based on the Nicene Creed. You know, we believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty. So one God, the Father, is there as part of the Nicene Creed. And this one God, the Father, is homousios, which is a word from the Nicene Creed, meaning one being with, or one essence with, and it is homousios with the Spirit. So if the one God, the Father, is the Spirit, is the homousios Spirit. God is Spirit, as it says in the New Testament. And also, the Son is homousios with the Spirit. So they are one being, homousios, but it's sort of a linear progression. The Spirit comes from the Father, or as it says in the Nicene Creed, proceeds from the Father. And in the Nicene Creed, the ousios, it says that the Son is begotten of the ousios of the Father, begotten of the essence of the Father, sometimes is translated. So that's the Nicene Creed.
Let me just make sure I'm understanding. You're saying this is the Quranic Trinity?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
You're saying that the Quran does support the fact that the God has a son, or the Father has a son?
You caught me out there. We said Quranic, and I said yes, it is. I should have said no, not the Abbasid Quran. We're not talking about the Abbasid Quran. We're talking about the Umayyad hadiths. This is the Umayyad
Make sure you make that
Trinity.
distinction. So we're not
Okay.
talking about the Quran we have in our hand today, because I know
No.
every Muslim will shut you down and say this is one of the
Yeah.
first things they throw at us. How could God have a son? So you're
Yes.
talking about the Proto Qur'an would have this view.
This is in those Umayyad texts. If you follow this key that I'm giving you, you're going to see this Trinity again and again in the Umayyad texts. By the way, when you said, is this Trinity in the Quran? I'm understanding it because in my mind, I'm trying to fix the word Quran equals Karyana equals Mikra, which means Old Testament readings. And the answer is yes, this is the Trinity as described in the Old Testament. But it's not in the Abbasid Quran. No, this is not, not in the Abbasid
I'm going to keep asking you this because
Yes.
if I didn't hear what you're saying, the others aren't going to hear what you're saying. Okay, continue on. Thank you.
So I hope it's clear. So this is the Trinity you're going to find in the Umayyad texts, and it's kind of in the old, as I said, in the Old Testament readings, the Mikra, the Karyana, the original Quran that the Umayyad texts are referring to. It is not in the Abbasid Quran. It is not part of the Abbasid religion, and it's just another proof you're going to see in the verses which we're going to examine over the coming shows how these texts completely contradict and undermine the Abbasid religion.
Or you might say the standard Islamic narrative.
Or the standard Islamic narrative. So that's the first thing. So you're going to have to revert the words Allah, Al-Rahman, and Al-Rahim back to Father, Son, and Spirit. And that might get rid of many of the allegations which are presented to you. You will find that this is consistent throughout the entire Quran. You might think, hold on a second, all you're doing here is just changing. There's a kind of a Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. There's just kind of a, in the name of Allah, the merciful, the benevolent, the merciful at the beginning of all these verses. So you just replaced it with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But the fact that Al-Rahman is always going to be fitting with verses about the Son, and the fact that Al-Rahim is always going to be fitting with verses about the Spirit, according to this Trinity image which I just gave you, is well, I mean, how many times does it have to be a coincidence before it stops being a coincidence? Is obviously beyond probability. It's beyond probability. Incidentally, also the word Allah itself. This name Allah is actually a euphemism to protect pronunciation of the sacred name in Judeo-Arabic. In Judeo-Arabic, it's actually representing a Hebrew name of God. Jay, do you know which name of God we're talking about?
Yeah, this is what we were talking about earlier, and that's El Eloha, which you can't say publicly, but I can.
Yes, and that's the God of Israel. This name appears several times in the Old Testament. It's one of the titles of God. But we can pronounce it if we remove one of those letters. So it's no longer a sacred name. It's no longer a sacred text. It's no longer a prayer. We can talk about it in a secular context by saying El La, because we've removed that Aleph in the middle between the two L's, and now it's just a common way of talking about God, which is quite interesting because it shows that the fact that this way of spelling it is appearing in these Umayyad texts proves that these Umayyad texts were never meant to be taken as sacred literature. If it was, then they wouldn't have removed the Aleph between the two there. This is a name which we use in Judeo-Arabic to refer to God the Father, but it's been euphemized. So anyway, we've got that step there. So if step 3 didn't work, and suddenly the passage that has been thrown at you is still not looking pretty Christian, then, or at least Hebrew Messianist, Messianic Jewish, if you like, then there's a 4th step you can use, and that's to apply tripartite Christology. Okay, tripartite Christology. I'm going to have to open up a little image for you to have a look at. So tripartite Christology. What is tripartite Christology? It's something which many traditional Christians will be familiar with. It's the idea that Jesus has sort of 3 roles as prophet, priest, and king, or he is also the way, the truth, and the life. And it's also in the Old Testament, he appeared in what's called theophanies, or sometimes called Christophanies. And those 3 forms which he appeared in the Old Testament are the angelic messenger of the Lord, or the word of the Lord, or the Spirit of the Lord. And you'll find that these 3 this is how he appears in the Old Testament through as in the theophanies. If you believe that Jesus, the Messiah, is appearing in the Old Testament, then these are the three ways in which he appears. He appears as the angel of the Lord, the word of the Lord, and the Spirit of the Lord. It's like the angel of the Lord appeared unto so and so, or the word of the Lord came unto so and so, or the Spirit of the Lord came to this prophet. And this is how he's referred to in the Old Testament as the word, the Spirit, and the angelic messenger. In fact, the word for an angelic messenger in Judaism, an archangel is Rashi Malika. So this Rashi, you can hear the idea of Rasul in here. This is actually Ras. It kind of reminds you of the Arabic. There's actually a linguistic connection, if you like, between the two, because there is no linguistic connection between the Arabic word Rasul and the Hebrew word Shaliach, which means messenger. But in this Rashi, there is actually there is this sort of connection. So Rasul is the archangel, the angel of the Lord, the angelic messenger. So these are the three forms which Jesus appears in the Old Testament, and this is what we call a tripartite Christology. In the same sort of sense, it's like if following the Nicene Creed, if Jesus is God from God, light from light, then he's also kind of a Trinity from Trinity as well. There's a little bit of a tripartite kind of identity in him. And so that's another thing you have to be aware of. In fact, the Quran uses this phrase. It refers to him as the Rasulullah, the Kalimatullah, and the Ruh Minhu. So it means that he is the messenger of God, the word of God, and the Spirit from God. So that is the tripartite Christology which you're going to find in the Quran. And this is the next step which you've got to look at. So if applying the tripartite Christology still hasn't worked and still hasn't made sense of a verse that you've got the Quran, which is completely different to what they are telling you that the verse means, then we have to think, is it against modalism? Step 5, is it against modalism? So modalism, I've got a little image of modalism to help. So modalism, Sabellian modalism, I've got it up here with 3 other kinds of Christology for you to compare it to, because I found it pretty difficult to get one picture which could not be confused with other forms of Christology. But Sabellian modalism is certainly not what the Umayyad texts are about. Certainly the Umayyad texts do not like Sabellian modalism. And Sabellian modalism is very basically the idea that the Father became the Son at the incarnation, a temporal event which happened between 1 BC and 30 AD, roughly, and then became the Holy Spirit at Pentecost. And so the Father sort of transforms into the Son, and the Son transforms into the Holy Spirit. But essentially it's one being who takes on different modes depending on what he wants to do. Sometimes it's been talked about as being like ice changing into water and then changing into vapor, but not that these 3 things exist all simultaneously in their different states, but they only exist as one entity, one thing which transforms into these different states depending on what that entity wants to achieve. So that's Sabellian modalism in a sort of a classical understanding. And I believe that there are no Sabellian modalists in the world today, or anybody who follows Sabellian modalism in the world today. But that's certainly one of the things which the Umayyad texts does not like and sort of stands against it. I'm not going to talk about the other 3 images on this slide. I've only put them there for comparison so you can see what I'm trying to get at with this Sabellian modalism in comparison with some 3 other kinds of Christology. Okay, I think that's all that needs to be said about that. So now, if step 5 hasn't solved your problem and given you a completely different interpretation from the verse which has been given to you, it might be time to go on to step 6. Is it against tritheism? Okay, so this is tritheism. This is not a trinity. These are 3 gods that sort of operate and go around together doing different things in a team. It's a kind of a teamwork. It's classical paganism. It's polytheism. It doesn't matter that maybe one of these gods is kind of many things in one, but the other 2 gods are not. And they work as a team. This is basically the classical sort of understanding of tritheism. When you have misunderstood the concept of the oneness of God, which exists in the Judeo-Christian tradition, to the extent that you now have three gods sitting down around the table, devising, making decisions by committee, so to speak, or even working on different things and possibly even in conflict with each other. This is tritheism. And it's very important to note this very key point. There is a word in Arabic, a very ancient word in Arabic for the Trinity. And that word in Arabic is al-thaluth. Al-thaluth. This word, if the Umayyad texts were fighting against the Trinity, there is absolutely no doubt at all that the word al-thaluth should appear in those Arabic texts, and yet it doesn't. It doesn't appear, not once in the entire modern Abbasid Quran. It didn't even after all of the censorship and redactions and edits that it went through. Even in the modern Hafs version of the Quran, the word al-thaluth, which is still has been consistently the word for the Trinity, it is still missing from the Hafs Qur'an. What they have instead is the word thalatha. Can you hear the difference? Al-thaluth and thalatha. Thalatha means three, and even the modern Hafs version of the Quran is only criticizing thalatha, those people who say they are three gods, not those people who say there is a trinity, al-thaluth. So that's another point. If it's speaking out, if you look and you follow the process looking for the words word for word, and you see the word thalatha there instead of al-thaluth, then you know it's not criticizing the Trinity, it's actually criticizing tritheism. Other people who followed tritheism were also the Gnostics. While they may have been even more than Gnostic Christianity, had many deities, but three important deities in Gnostic Christianity was the concept of the Father, the Mother, and the Son as three divinities, three deities. And one example of Gnostic Christianity is something called Collyridianism, which you can go and have a look at if you want to do some more research into tritheism and Gnostic Christianity. To a certain extent, it's sort of continued today in the Mormon church, but not very much. It's similar, but not identical.
Is this
okay? So that's tritheism.
Is this
yes?
An example of this would be chapter 5, verse 116, where Allah says to Jesus, "Is it true you and your mother are
yes.
do we worship as gods?"
Yes. Did you tell them to take me and my mother as gods besides Allah? Yes, and it uses the dual case there. Two gods besides Allah. It's interesting it uses the dual case there because it's actually more like that verse specifically is more like a kind of a dualistic mother and child religion, rather which has no mention of the father. But there are other verses which said they have surely disbelieved to say the father is the third of three. Allah is the third of three. This would be a perfect example of calling tritheists disbelievers. But this verse with, "Did you tell them to take me and my mother as two gods instead of Allah?" and it uses that dual case, two gods, could be referring to what may be mariolatry, where almost to the point where you've got the father has been excluded and they're just literally worshipping the mother and the child. But it's again a kind of Gnosticism, because there are some Gnostic sects which focused more on the mother and the son and completely excluded the father as being a sort of a demiurge, evil creator. So
most Muslims who talk about the 51116 do assume that the father is implied, that it's father saying, "Is it true that you too are also gods along with me?" And that's the Trinity that the Quran's confronting, which is odd, since there are very few people I know, Christians, that I know, that would have Mary as part of the Trinity.
But then you see again, the word thaluth is not there. The word Trinity is not there. It's very clearly speaking about multiple gods, which is more like tritheism or polytheism, and isn't at all like Trinity, where we have one God.
Understood. And so that would be another example, is all I'm asking.
Yes. In that case, yes, I understand what you're coming at. So the point of it is that the word thaluth is just not there.
Yeah.
That's okay. Trinity. It's just not there. All right, let's go on. So now, if after eliminating all of this possibility so far, you still find that the verse is basically saying what they say it's saying, it's time to think about step 7. Is it really against, for example, they'll say it's against Jews and Christians, for example. Is it really against Jews and Christians, or is it against Judaizer and Nazarene adoptionists? Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail of the Judaizers and Nazarenes because the Odon Lafontaine has already gone into great detail on the Judeo-Nazarenes and what they believed, and also Thomas Alexander has gone into great detail about this sort of Nazarene sort of Judeo-Christianity, although of course Thomas Alexander doesn't know and is not interested in any kind of Judaic explanation for any of these things. He's only looking at it from a purely sort of Christian point of view. But essentially what he's describing are these Nazarenes who he might call Christians and I would call Judeo-Nazarenes, Judaic group. And the adoptionist ideas that these sects have essentially comes out later in Islam with something called ittihad, which is the concept of being one or achieving union with the divine, which is there in Sufism today. It's there in Imamism. It's very much a concept of Abbasid Islam. It's mystical union with the divine. So most famous verse, of course, you'll probably all be thinking of is the verses where it says that it says Al-Yahud say that Uzair is Ibn Allah. Al-Yahud say Uzair is the son of God, and the Nazarenes say Al-Masih Ibn Allah, and they're both wrong. So it will be presented to you as being against Jews and Christians, but the correct word for Jews used in the Quran is actually Hudan. And the word Yahud is literally a translation, or Al-Yahud is literally a translation from Syriac, Yehuda, which is the name Judas, traitor, or Judaizer. So what we actually have there is not a reference to Jews, but people who have abandoned Christ to become more like Jews in the way they perceive it without actually contacting, I suppose, Jewish community and trying to learn about Judaism, just perceiving it. And the word Uzair ibn Allah, Uzair, everybody tells you that this means Ezra. Ezra is not a prophet. There's another word in Hebrew, Ezra, which has got a slightly different ending. It's actually harder, Ezrach, as opposed to Ezra. There's a difference between it. The Ezrach refers to a homeborn Jew, somebody who is born to Jewish parents. And the idea is that these people, the Judaizers, will almost start worshipping Jews to a by saying, well, every homeborn Jew is a son of God. Not just Jesus. Every homeborn Jew is. So Jesus is nothing special. If you're a Jew, you're a son of God. Therefore, they turn their backs on Jesus. They Judaize. They become the Judas. They become the betrayer. They betray Jesus, and they go to this sort of this idea that they're almost worshipping Jews. So that's the Judaizer. The Nazarene, but the Jews, of course, not actually physically God's children, but are in union with God, are in ittihad with God. And the Nazarenes, also the adoptionists, the same word is used again. Ittihad is the word which is used for the Nazarene adoptions. You see criticisms about this again and again in the Quran. Most verses, when it says, for example, Allah or the Father does not have a son, the word you're going to see there is this word for adoption, which is ittihad. That's the word you're going to see in those verses. So is it against Judaizers? Is it against Nazarenes adoptionists? Does it have the word ittihad? If so, then you've got your answer. It's not against Jews and Christians. It's against adoptionists who are people who believe that, yes, Jesus may have been a Messiah, but he was not the Messiah. He was just like adopted as God's son in the same way that Solomon was, or that David was, or that Saul was, and that anybody can be if they are of that lineage. So the Judeo-Nazarenes, it's been spoken about a lot, were people who claimed, Odon's mentioned this, claimed to be of the scions of the house of David, or the scions of the house of Jesse, Netzarim, scions. That's the word. And they believe that in every generation, there is one of them who is the Messiah of of the time, the Messiah of the day, and can be adopted as God's child, ready and waiting to be adopted as God's child. This still exists in Sufism. If you go through a Sufi order in Islam, the Grand Master of the Sufi order will be essentially in communion, in union, mystical union, ittihad, adopted by God and in union with God in that sense. Or it exists in the Imamism, when you have the chief imam of the Shiite sect is literally in union with God. So oddly enough, the Umayyad texts are completely condemning such Islamic groups. And that's the step 7. So if that hasn't solved your problem, you can ask this question. Is it against Mesopotamian paganism? That is it using the word shirk? Shirk. Is the word shirk there? That's the associators. The Mesopotamian pagans, basically we're talking about it's a very ancient idea which spread to different sects over the times, but essentially the Zoroastrian leaders of the Sasanian Empire, for example, Khosrau himself, had a similar idea to the adoptionists, that he had become the greatest god. And the emperors, the Shahanshah, the king of kings of every of the Sasanian dynasty, every Sasanian Shahanshah, king of kings, was essentially one with God in the same sort of way. And so you'll see sometimes that this word shirk or sharika will come always in reference to very close by when it's mentioned adoptionism. So it might be talking out about Nazarene adoptionists. It'll use the word ittihad, and it'll say that he has not adopted a son. And then it'll also say, and there is no partner, or there is no associate with him. There is no la sharika lahu, which means then there's no associate, meaning neither he didn't adopt a child, and the Persian emperor is not one with him either. So it's basically saying it'll put those two together. Okay, so if it hasn't already completely undermined whatever the story has been given to you, and it's given a completely different definition by now, there's step 9.
But before we get that, and it's in step 8, is that then what you see on the Dome of the Rock, where you have La ilaha illallah, Arsharkatu? So you have the reference that God is one, when he is not an associator. He doesn't there on the Dome of the Rock and also on the coins. Is that what you're referring to here?
Yes, because the Persian emperors used to put themselves on the coins, and they sometimes even refer to themselves as Yazadta, which means God. In Yazid is another form of it. Yazadta means God in the Persian language, or the old Persian language. And so they had removed those references to Yazadta, and they were saying, and now God has no associate. He has no partner in his sovereignty on the earth. That would apply to the idea of like a divine right of kings as well, if you like. So this idea comes from this Mesopotamian paganism. Basically, all the old Mesopotamian rulers considered themselves essentially gods. They appointed themselves as gods. So these verses, and the one you mentioned on the Dome of the Rock, actually does come directly after mentioning adoptionism. It uses the word ittihad again. So it says he did not adopt a child, and he has no like earthly counterpart, so to speak.
Let me just take it one step further, though. Isn't it? I mean, when Thomas was going through all of the inscriptions of the Dome of the Rock, when he came to this word sharkatu, which is reference to shirk, he applied that not to pagans but to Christians himself. It is the Christians who believed, because of John 3:16, he is the adopted, he is the son of God, therefore he begetteth, nor is he begotten. That's also on the inscriptions. That's against John 3:16. And the sharkatul, or the shirk, the idea of shirk, is a polemic against the Christians who they believe have elevated Jesus alongside God. Therefore, they are the associationists. You're saying that the associationists, or the reference here, is against paganism. Wouldn't it also be against the Christians at that time?
No. I'm going to basically blow all of those ideas out of the water when I examine those verses. This is really an example of inheriting and trying to. A lot of people, they can't get past it, and it's sadly something which also I think Gordon mentioned as well. But it's the influence of the Abbasid hegemony It's so strong, it's so powerful that if you've been exposed to it, it's almost like you can't see past it. But you cannot use those Abbasid ideas when you're looking at these Umayyad texts. I'm going to explain, of course.
Okay. No one's saying. Okay, I agree with that, Joe.
In due course,
but Joe, this is on the Dome of the Rock, so this is not Abbasid. This is the late 7th century.
It's just the way you.
It's just
the way you read. It's just an interpretation. It's not look.
Let me finish. Joe, let me finish.
Yeah.
We do have these references, and it's very clear that almost all the references on the inscriptions are against Jesus' divinity, against the Trinity, and against.
I'm going to blow it out of the water, Jay. I'm going to blow it out. You're going to.
You're not going to like what we've done earlier, then, because let's see.
I was sitting there laughing the whole time when I was watching those shows. You know, I was actually laughing my head off. I thought to myself, how sad that they couldn't actually see this. But if you and it's ironic that for example, Thomas was talking about Christoph Luxemburg's method, and yet he failed to apply it consistently in this case. But I'll show you. We'll go through those in due course, in due time, because there's something really a big bombshell. It's going to shock a lot of people, which is written on that Dome of the Rock inscription. But no, this Dome of the Rock does speak out against adoptionists. It doesn't like adoptionists. It doesn't like adoptionism. And it doesn't like the idea of being a sort of a divine counterpart on the earth to God, as all the emperors did. You know, they came to this sort of agreement in the time of Abdul Malik, basically making peace between people who had come from two very different backgrounds. Some people had come from Zoroastrian tradition, where it was normal for their emperors to be a god on earth, and that's the Sasanian religion at least, and the Sasanian version of Zoroastrianism. And others were coming from the Semitic background, where such a thing was impossible to contemplate. And you have to also remember the location. This rock that the Dome of the Rock is around, it's nothing to Christians or in Christianity. It has never been anything for Christians. It's been completely insignificant. There are only one kind of people who have ever gone up to visit and pray at that rock that the dome is encasing. And that is the Judaic people. This whole little complex, it's not visible from anywhere except when you're inside trying to pray towards facing this rock, which incidentally has been prohibited by rabbinical Judaism. They prohibit Jews from doing that, but Karaite Jews still do it.
Okay. And we don't want to get too much into this. That will be a whole other time for another place. I just want to bring that up there, because not everybody, and myself, probably won't agree with you on this, but we'll unpack that later on. Let's go to number 9.
Once it's unpacked, you're going to be shocked. All right, then, so next step.
I'm willing to be shocked. I'm not going to say I will be shocked, because I'm not sure that you're looking at what was happening politically as well as what was happening theologically time and in that place.
Look, we're kind of spoiling the book by looking at the end before we've looked at the story. But I understand you're going to give me the chance to explain the whole story.
Yes, you'll need to convince me and an awful lot of other people that you are correct. Let's go to number 9.
Yeah. So anyway, the point is, if you follow this troubleshooting step and understand that if it's using the word shirk, it's not against Christians. It's already bashed the modalists on the head. It's bashed the tritheists on the head. It's bashed the adoptionists on the head. What kind of Christians are left? You know, it's not bashing them on the head again. This time it's dealing with another sect, which it's got to deal with, and that's the Zoroastrians. So it's bashing them on the head now. And then if that hasn't worked, then look at step 9. Is it a monophysite tradition? Is it a monophysite tradition? Does this passage that you're looking at, although it may be something which is outside of Roman Christianity, is it something that the monophysites would have liked? Now, monophysites are a kind of Christians who believe that Jesus was entirely of divine origin, as we saw in that little picture of the Trinity, which is described in the Quran, in the Umayyad texts. Is entirely of divine origin, and because he's of a divine origin, can simply transform into a human if he wants to. He visited Abraham as 3 angels. He appeared to Moses as a burning bush and a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke. So it's very easy for him to just appear as a human being or a baby born of Mary, and to grow up and live and eat and be crucified as any normal human being would be. This is actually called Severian monophysitism. It's a classical form of monophysitism in the Oriental Orthodox Church. So, is it a monophysite tradition? Is it a record of something which would have been complementary to monophysite beliefs? For example, the Gospel of Thomas. Oh, there you go. You see, even as a child, he was divine. He could do these miracles as a child. He didn't have to wait until he was adopted by the Holy Spirit at baptism to do these things, because he was always divine. There you go. You've got this other infancy gospel where he's speaking to his mother from the cradle, because he was divine. So these things are things which might be supporting a monophysite view, and they would have been sympathetic to those ideas, even though it's foreign to a Roman Christian audience. So, in other words, is it a monophysite tradition? That's the other thing that you might want to dismiss. If it is, then you've solved that. Next step. Go on to the next step. If it hasn't solved the problem, go on to the next step. Cross-reference the problem word for alternatives. Okay, if you think that this verse is still problematic, and it's still causing that they're presenting you with an interpretation of a verse which seems to be only possible to be interpreted in one way, cross-reference, try and identify which word in the verse is the problem, which word is the obstacle, and then cross-reference in your corpus.quran.com or other word-for-word source for alternatives. You can usually click through to have a look at how many times this word occurs throughout the Abbasid Quran, and you'll see that often enough you'll find that there are so many different occurrences that there's going to be at least one or two different meanings which give you an alternative meaning, and that'll change the entire meaning of the verse for you. So that's probably going to solve a lot of problems. For example, you might have a verse which says, we believe in Jesus and Moses and the prophets, and we make no distinction between them. And you say, well, there you go. That's what they're saying. They say it doesn't. There's no distinction between them, and that means that they don't make a distinction between Jesus and the other prophets. He's just a prophet. But then, of course, if you look through the cross-reference, you'll see this word doesn't say distinction. It means division. So, in fact, it's saying we don't divide the believers of Jesus away from the believers of Moses, believers in Moses or any other prophets. We can believe in all of these messengers of God, Messiah of God, prophets of God, and we don't divide into sects. We're trying to unite ourselves together. It's got this idea of being you can be a Hebrew and a Christian at the same time. That's basically the idea that they're putting there. So that's the cross-reference for the problem of problem words with alternatives. If that hasn't solved the problem, if the word is still consistent in meaning, my suggestion to you is consider a Judeo-Arabic meaning. We've looked at Judeo-Arabic briefly. I've suggested that the Umayyad texts were written in Judeo-Arabic, and I'm going to explain in some subsequent videos why that's the case. But if you're still having problems, then consider a Judeo-Arabic meaning for the word, and that will probably solve the matter. I can give a list of common Judeo-Arabic words which might solve the problems, but I'll do it at a later date, or if somebody wants to email me at redjudaism@gmail.com, then I'll send you a list of Judeo-Arabic words which can be helpful in that situation. And finally, if you're still having a problem with the verse, then contact me with your payment details ready. And if I can't explain or find that I've missed a step in this troubleshooting key, then you definitely deserve a reward.
Okay, so hold on. So, Joe, what you have been saying here and what's going on here, Joe, is this troubleshooting key that you have put up there, this key of 11 steps and a 12th step demanding contacting you and demanding recompense because
if I can't explain it,
you have found a problem in the first 11 steps. Really is a way to help Muslims Muslims understand that the two different renditions of what became the Quran, the Umayyad hadiths that you're saying is from the 7th century, written by the Umayyads in the 7th century, and written with really good intent of confronting these many different heresies that existed at that time, Christian heresies and Jewish Christian heresies that existed at that time, has been clouded over and ameliorated and deleted and accreted and corrupted, you might say, by the Abbasids after 750. in the mid 8th century and later. And if that's why this is something that has come up. We have had this problem for, well, goodness, for me, for over 40 years, where Muslims have come up to me, the Dawah team, many of those at Speaker's Corner, they keep on throwing these, you believe this and you believe that and you believe, and I'm saying, no, I don't believe that. But where are you getting it? Well, because the Quran in chapter 4, verse 171 says this, and the Quran, especially in chapter 5, there's reference after reference after reference of seeming, as I would say, heresies. These are heresies. They don't represent me. Chapter 5, verse 72, chapter 5, verse 75, chapter 5, verse 116, or chapter 6, verse 101, that God had a wife. I don't believe God had a wife. I don't believe Mary's part of the Trinity. I don't believe any of this. Well, so where are these all coming from? What you're saying is, don't be surprised. They're in there because that is what the original Umayyad Hadith were all about. They were attacking these very heresies.
Yeah.
The heresies did exist. They were percolating all over this area in that part of the world, in Iraq and in Syria and in Jordan, what is today Iraq, Syria, and Jordan, and what is today Iran. All those areas in the north, these sectarian beliefs of God, and you've put them down to the tripart Christology, prophet, king, and priest. You put it down to modalism, the idea that all three are together in all three persons of the Trinity are in the person of Jesus Christ. The tritheism. Now, interestingly, you did put up pictures of Hindu gods, and I don't know, I hope people won't come back and throw that, Hinduism did exist at that part of the world. You're not saying that this is Hinduism, you're just giving a present day example of tritheism.
Yes, because we can't find amongst Christians today any example of tritheism, so I had to use
so that's why you're trying to define what tritheism in a modern day context, in a
modern day context,
in a Hindu context. And then you talked about the Judeo-Nazarene adoptionists, that Jesus was adopted as God at his baptism. But and then you come to this Mesopotamian paganism, which you believe, which is fascinating, because really what you're talking about here is this reference to sharkatul, or a shirk, the idea that the associators, which I've always assumed where all Christians, you're saying no, these are those like the Zoroastrians who believe they would elevate their emperor to a status of divinity. I think the word apotheosis is one that you use to support this, and that's
apotheosis.
What's the other ones you have?
Henosis. In Neoplatonism, it's called henosis, and generally
apotheosis is another one I think that you could put in there. So these are this paganism that existed and was part of that percolation there, and then the Monophysite tradition that Jesus has only one divine nature. Does not have human nature. So these are the ones that we're going to look for. These are the ones you say can exist. These are the ones that you need to see when you peel back all these layers that the Zoroastrians, I'm sorry, not the Zoroastrians, the Abbasids have introduced.
You might as well say Zoroastrians,
because you are okay. Because you're saying that these are Persian, these are
the Abbasids they were basically trying to bring back the good old days. That's what they were trying to do. They were trying to
the old Zoroastrian ideals. Okay.
Yeah. Zoroastrian laws, because Zoroastrians are very nice people these days, but that's because they don't have an empire which covers half the world. But in the olden days, you look at the Sasanians, their legal system, their divinization of their emperors. They had these little cubes all over the empire with their little idols, and 360 idols in them as well. So, this was, I think that the Sasanians were trying to bring it back. And of course, look at the Sasanian symbol, the crescent moon and star. The Abbasids were trying to bring all that back. And it took a long time. And maybe it's even still an ongoing process. It took an awfully long time to try and bring back that Sasanian religion, essentially. Yeah.
All right. That's interesting. Let's listen. So this key that you're putting out there, and you're putting it out, even you're putting money behind your claim, because you're willing to say that if anybody, once you go through these 11 categories, starting with the allegations of the translation, looking at the word themselves in Corpus Qur'an or Quranic Gateway, reverting to the word Allah itself, Alrahman, Alrahim, and the Father and the Son, and going through each of the tripart, modalism, tritheism, adoption of paganism, monophysitism, and also cross-referencing the words with alternatives, and then also look at Judeo-Arabism. If you're saying, if you look through these 11 steps and you still cannot find that Proto Qur'an, or do you still not find really what was going on in the 7th century? You're willing to pay $500 to
if they contact me and say, look, I've been through all these 11 steps. The 12th step is contact me, tell me what the problem is. It might be that it's one of a few exceptional circumstances which would just take far too long to explain. So I could actually give the answer, but if it's not one of those exceptional circumstances, or I can't explain it, then I'll give you the 500 if that's how much I've got in the bank account now that I can give you, to say basically a reward. And well, thank you for pulling a hole in this system, because it's not something that I believe in. It's a system which works. It's just a system that I found works. That's all. And I'd like to have as many people as possible try it out and see if they can also get it to work. And if they find a hole in it, then that's great. You're actually helping me, test the hypothesis. So I'll give you a reward for helping me out.
By doing this. What if a 5 or 6?
Well, only one. The first come, first serve. So if you
you only give it to the first one that is able to find a hole in it. Okay. Now, just to be clear, just so we're all clear, what you're saying basically is the Abbasid Quran that we have in our hand today. This is the Abbasid Quran. So this is it right here. The Quran, Abbasid Quran that we have in our hand today, has corrupted so much of the earliest Quran, but we can go back and find what that earliest Quran is by using these 11 steps. You want people to use these 11 steps to go back and see, what do these verses actually say? Who are they actually saying? What group are they actually confronting? When you do that, you can pretty much come back and reproduce that earliest Quran.
Pretty much, I think. Of course, there's going to be passages which have been deleted and burnt and lost forever. We are never going to see. For example, the word Thaluth, Trinity, should be there, but it's not in the Quran anywhere. The word Masihi, Christian, should be there, but it's not in the Quran anywhere. These verses have gone forever. But at least what they've left behind in this Abbasid version, apply these 11 steps, or the 12th step if there's an exceptional circumstance, which I can explain for you. And you will come at a very different looking book, essentially a kind of a monophysite Christian Jewish or Jewish Christian text, which the explanation we can give it later. But I've done the video before about the conversion of Omar to Christianity. He was a Jewish Messiah figure who was coming in to build his thing, and then he converted to Christianity. So with that in mind, it's well, obviously this text would be a Jewish Christian text, or at least a Jew who's converted to Christian type text. So apply what kind of Christian? Monophysite Christian. So apply that rule, and there you go. You found actually.
So you're saying the Proto Qur'an is a monophysite Jewish Christian text.
Yes, that's right.
And we're not here to try to define everybody or try to support and everything.
No.
And also, I can see some people are going to kick back and say, "Listen, you have not done a good definition of modalism." They will not probably agree with your view on tritheism or even tripartism.
I've actually tried to avoid the definitions of these. I just put the images up there to compare so that you can decide. Okay, how would you describe it? Because look. How many hundreds of years were the Christians fighting on over definitions because one person's choice of a word was not the way the other person would choose to use the same word, and so they had this heresy and excommunicated each other and stayed enemies for hundreds of years, and then finally patched things up and said, "Oh, is that what you meant by that word? I'm sorry." So of course, human language is very limited, and when we're trying to define these things and talk about these things, Christology, theology, it's very difficult. But I put those images up there so that you can get a comparison in your head. So you have some kind of idea.
Let me just say this. So before we do need to end this up, let me just ask this very quickly. The whole purpose of this the whole purpose of this exercise is to help people who are talking to Muslims face to face when they come up with different views of who they think Christians' beliefs about Jesus. We can go back and say, we can understand your confusion. We can understand why you're giving us, you're defining for us what you believe, because your Quran is so confused. But the reason it is confused is because of all these overlays that have come out between the 7th, 8th, and 9th century. Let's take you back to the original Quran. Let's take it back to, by using your key here, let's take you back to the Umayyad Hadith. And what you will find that these are ongoing discussions. These are ongoing debates that were happening in the 7th century.
Yes, very much so.
By monophysites, primarily against the other sectarian groups.
primarily, and also including some debates which were going on between Jews as well, in the Mishnah and rabbinical sort of ideas as well. So it's clearly.
I think we should just leave it there, because I don't want to get into a whole harangue about what each group defines himself as. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting here all day doing that. Let's put it at that. Let's put the challenge out there for all of those who are listening now. Joe has put out this key. Try and work through this key and see if you can agree with him. Now, what we're going to do, I think in the next episode, we're going to actually apply it to different verses, like chapter 4, verse 171. Am I correct?
Yep. We will. Well, hopefully, what I hope to do, if successful, is I'll throw some verses at you. You apply the key and see what you get out of it. I'll do some examples first, and then we'll throw it back and see. And the important thing is I want to see that this key is possible to be used by anybody, that anybody can use this key when a Taoist sort of throws their verses at you. You can use this key and use that verse right back again. So it will throw it right back at them and say, well, actually, you know what? There's a ton of information on the evolution of the Quran, and there's a lot of information that it suggests that it was written by Christians in the first place, or at least some kind of Christian converts. And this is what the verse looks like it says to me. And that would be, I think, ideal situation. If people are able to use this key to restore that meaning, then that would be great if they can.
Okay. All right. Well, you've put the challenge out there. You've all heard it. Come back to, how will they get in contact with you, by the way, if they believe that they have been able to find a hole in your key?
Send me an email, redjudaism@gmail.com.
Okay. And we'll put this right down here. You can see it. It's right, written right down here. redjudaism@gmail.com. Okay. That's right. You got it. You've all heard it. Now apply it and see if it works. Listen, thanks, Joe, for coming on board. Let's see what people do come back with. I'm not sure that I will be able to use the key. I know you're thinking that if I can do it, anybody can do it. Well, let's see. I'm not even sure that I can use the key, but I will try, and we'll do that in the next episode. All right. This is Jay and Joe, 3,000 miles apart. Over and out.